In the opulent heart of 1920s Vienna, a grand dinner at Baroness von Hohenberg's mansion hides a deadly secret. When Hercule Poirot receives a cryptic invitation to a last supper, he steps into a web of betrayal, where a priceless painting conceals an alchemical codex that could shift the balance of power. As a study is ransacked and a guest is murdered with a note marked Judas, Poirot's grey cells race to unmask the traitor among 12 suspects. In a single suspense-filled night, he unveils ambition, deceit, and a killer hiding in plain sight. Will the truth emerge before the final course is served? Chapter 1. The Invitation to Vienna. The Orient Express thundered through the twilight, its polished compartments aglow with the soft flicker of gas lamps. Hercule Poirot sat in his first-class cabin, his small, fastidious hands smoothing the edges of a letter that lay open on the table before him. The paper was thick, cream-coloured, and bore the faint scent of lavender. The handwriting was elegant, almost regal, with flourishes that spoke of wealth and refinement. It was an invitation from Baroness Elizabeth von Hohenberg, a woman whose name carried whispers of influence across Europe's aristocratic circles. She requested his presence at a private dinner in her Viennese mansion, an event she called, with curious emphasis, the Last Supper. The letter hinted at a matter of utmost delicacy, one requiring the unique discernment of Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's dark eyes, sharp as a falcon's, scanned the words again. "A puzzle awaits you," the Baroness had written, "one that threatens to unravel the harmony of my house." The vagueness irritated him. He disliked mysteries that cloaked themselves in ambiguity, yet the challenge stirred his curiosity. The Baroness was renowned not only for her wealth, but for her collection of rare art, each piece rumoured to hold secrets as valuable as the canvases themselves. Why, then, this cryptic summons? And why the biblical allusion to the Last Supper? His moustache, meticulously waxed, gave a slight quiver as his grey cells began their dance. The train's rhythm was soothing, a metronome to his thoughts, but it could not dispel the unease that clung to him like damp fog. He folded the letter with precision, slipping it into the inner pocket of his immaculate waistcoat, and adjusted his pince-nez. Outside, the Austrian countryside unfolded in shades of amber and russet, the Alps looming in the distance like silent sentinels. Vienna awaited, a city of music and shadows where secrets, Poirot knew, often hid behind gilded facades. Upon arriving at the Westbahnhof, Poirot was met by a liveried chauffeur, a taciturn man with a scar above his left eyebrow. The drive to the Baroness's mansion was brief but revealing. The streets of Vienna gleamed under gaslights, their cobblestones polished by recent rain, yet the air carried a chill that was not entirely due to the autumn evening. The mansion, itself, was a Baroque masterpiece, its facade adorned with sculpted cherubs and ivy that clung like whispered secrets. As Poirot stepped from the car, he noted the heavy iron gates, the vigilant eyes of a groundskeeper, and the faint glow of candlelight seeping through tall windows. The butler, Klaus, greeted him at the door. He was a lean figure, his face pale and angular, with eyes that seemed to weigh every gesture. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his German accent clipped, "the Baroness awaits you in the drawing-room." Poirot followed, his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the marble floor. The interior was a symphony of opulence, crystal chandeliers, tapestries woven with gold thread, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors gazing down from gilded frames. Baroness Elizabeth von Hohenberg stood by a roaring fire, her presence commanding despite her delicate frame. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her emerald gown shimmered like a forest at dusk. Her eyes, however, were what held Poirot's attention. Sharp, almost predatory, yet shadowed by a flicker of fear. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending a gloved hand, "your reputation precedes you. I am grateful you accepted my invitation." Poirot bowed, his manners as polished as the silver at his cuffs. "Madame, it is an honour, but I must confess, your letter intrigues me. You speak of a puzzle, yet you offer no details. What is the nature of this Last Supper?" Her lips tightened, and she glanced toward the window, as if expecting to see a figure in the darkness beyond. "Tonight, I host a dinner for 12 guests, myself included. Each is a person of note, a diplomat, a scientist, an artist, among others. But I have reason to believe one among them harbours ill intent. A betrayal, Monsieur Poirot, is brewing in my house." "Betrayal?" Poirot's voice was soft, but his eyes gleamed with interest. "Of what kind, madame? Financial, personal, or perhaps something more dangerous?" She hesitated, her fingers brushing the sapphire pendant at her throat. "I cannot say precisely. It is a feeling, a shadow that moves when I turn to look. But I trust your little grey cells, as you call them, to uncover the truth before it is too late." Poirot inclined his head, his mind already cataloguing the possibilities. A betrayal among Vienna's elite, veiled by the elegance of a dinner party. It was a puzzle worthy of his talents. "Very well, madame," he said. "I shall observe, I shall listen, and I shall find your shadow." As Klaus led him to his guest room to freshen up before dinner, Poirot's thoughts turned to the guests he would soon meet. A diplomat might conceal political motives, a scientist, forbidden knowledge, an artist, a passion that burned too brightly. The Baroness's fear, though vague, was real, and Poirot knew that fear often pointed to truths too dangerous to speak aloud. He adjusted his tie in the mirror, his reflection a study in calm precision, and prepared to face the enigma of the Last Supper in Vienna. Chapter 2. The Gathering. The dining room of Baroness Elisabeth von Hohenberg's Viennese mansion was a spectacle of grandeur, a stage set for a drama yet to unfold. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, casting prismatic light across a mahogany table that gleamed under the weight of silver and porcelain. 12 place settings, each marked with a monogrammed napkin, awaited their occupants, and at the centre a candelabrum flickered, its flames dancing as if privy to the secrets of the night. Hercule Poirot stood at the threshold, his keen eyes absorbing every detail. The velvet drapes, the ancestral portraits, the faint scent of beeswax and roses. He adjusted his cufflinks, his movements precise, and prepared to meet the players in this enigmatic tableau. The Baroness entered first, her emerald gown trailing like a whisper across the parquet floor. She took her place at the head of the table, her posture regal yet taut, like a violin string tuned to breaking. Poirot, seated to her right, observed her closely. Her fingers, adorned with a single sapphire ring, betrayed a slight tremor as she unfolded her napkin. She was a woman accustomed to control, yet something or someone unsettled her. "Monsieur Poirot," she murmured, leaning toward him, "you will find my guests eclectic. Observe them well." One by one, the guests arrived, each announced by Klaus the butler, whose gaunt frame seemed to hover like a spectre. First came Dr. Karl Weber, a chemist of middle age, his spectacles glinting under the chandelier. His hands twitched as he took his seat, a nervous tic that Poirot noted with interest. Next was Frau Anna Richter, a soprano whose fame filled Vienna's opera houses. Her golden hair was piled high, and her laugh, bright as a bell, rang out as she greeted the Baroness, though her eyes darted too quickly as if seeking an escape. Herr Victor Braun, a diplomat with a lean, patrician face, entered with a measured stride, his smile polite but opaque, like a sealed diplomatic pouch. Countess Sophia Dragomir followed, a Romanian exile whose beauty was tempered by a melancholy air. Her dark eyes, shadowed by long lashes, seemed to carry the weight of a lost homeland. Herr Friedrich Lang, a financier, bustled in with an air of self-importance, his plump fingers glittering with rings that caught the candlelight. His joviality felt forced, and Poirot's moustache twitched at the sight of his restless hands, as if they longed to grasp something beyond the silverware. Elsa Klein, a young journalist with a sharp, inquisitive gaze, entered next, her notebook tucked discreetly under her arm. Her auburn hair was pinned simply, but her eyes missed nothing, sweeping the room like a searchlight. Herr Gustav Mahler, an art dealer with a reclusive reputation, was the last to arrive. His coat was slightly rumpled, and his fingers bore faint traces of paint as if he had been handling canvases moments before. He nodded curtly to the Baroness, his expression guarded, and took his seat opposite Poirot. The remaining guests, a retired general, a playwright, a botanist, a historian, and a young heiress, filled the table, each bringing their own aura of ambition, secrecy, or unease. 12 in all, including the Baroness. They mirrored the apostles of the Last Supper painting that hung in her study, a connection Poirot found impossible to ignore. The meal began with a consommé, its golden clarity a stark contrast to the murky undercurrents at the table. Conversation flowed, orchestrated by the Baroness with the skill of a conductor. She spoke of Vienna's cultural renaissance, of Strauss's waltzes and Freud's theories, her voice a velvet glove over an iron will. Yet Poirot, sipping his wine with deliberate care, detected fissures in the facade. Frau Richter's laugh grew sharper when Herr Braun mentioned political tensions in the Balkans. Dr. Weber's spoon clattered against his bowl when the Baroness alluded to her art collection. Countess Sophia's fork paused mid-air as Herr Lang boasted of his financial ventures in Eastern Europe. Poirot's grey cells worked tirelessly, cataloguing each gesture, each inflection. He noted Elsa Klein's pen, which scratched furiously in her notebook whenever the conversation turned to the Baroness's wealth. Herr Mahler, though silent, watched the Baroness with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The general, red-faced and blustering, seemed oblivious to the tension, but his anecdotes about military campaigns felt oddly pointed, as if testing the room's allegiances. The playwright, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, spoke in riddles, his words laced with irony that made Frau Richter's smile falter. As the second course, a delicate pheasant in truffle sauce, was served, the atmosphere grew heavier, like a storm gathering over the Danube. Poirot, ever the observer, posed a question to the table, his voice soft yet commanding. Madame la Baroness speaks of her art collection. Tell me, mes amis, what is it about a painting that captivates? Is it beauty, or perhaps a hidden truth? His eyes swept the room, lingering on each guest. Herr Mahler responded first, his voice low and deliberate. A painting's value lies in its craftsmanship, Monsieur Poirot. Beauty is secondary to authenticity. His fingers brushed the tablecloth, leaving a faint smudge of blue. Dr. Weber, adjusting his spectacles, countered, Some say art conceals knowledge, chemical secrets perhaps from centuries past. His words were casual, but his tic betrayed him. A rapid blink that Poirot filed away. Countess Sophia spoke softly, her accent tinged with sorrow. In my country, art was often a refuge for truths too dangerous to speak. Her gaze flickered to the Baroness, who raised her glass in a toast. To truth, the Baroness said, her voice clear, but edged with steel. The guests echoed her, their glasses catching the light. But Poirot saw hesitation in their movements. Herr Braun's hand lingered too long in the air. Frau Richter's smile was too tight, and Herr Lang's eyes darted to the door. The tension snapped like a brittle twig when a scream tore through the room. Klaus burst in, his face ashen, his usual composure shattered. "Madame!" he gasped, clutching the doorframe. "Your study! It has been violated!" The guests froze, their forks suspended, their eyes darting to one another like moths to a flame. The Baroness rose, her face pale but resolute. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos, "it seems your puzzle has arrived sooner than expected." Poirot stood, his calm unshaken, his mind already racing. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his tone cutting through the murmurs, "no one is to leave this house until we uncover the truth. Lead on, Klaus." As the butler guided him toward the study, Poirot's thoughts turned to the painting of the Last Supper. Its apostles a silent jury over the night's events. Someone at this table, he knew, had acted with purpose, and he would not rest until their mask was removed. The game had begun, and Hercule Poirot was ready to play. Chapter 3. The ransacked study. Hercule Poirot followed Klaus through the labyrinthine corridors of the Baroness's mansion, his polished shoes tapping a steady rhythm on the marble floors. The butler's angular frame moved with urgency, his lantern casting jagged shadows on the walls, adorned with tapestries and gilt-framed mirrors. The air grew cooler as they approached the study, a heavy oak door standing slightly ajar, as if mocking the sanctity of the room beyond. Poirot's senses sharpened. He noted the faint scent of ink and old leather, the distant murmur of the guests left behind in the dining room, and the way Klaus's hands trembled as he pushed the door open. The study was a scene of calculated chaos. Books lay scattered across the floor, their pages splayed like broken wings. Drawers gaped open, their contents, letters, ledgers, and a silver letter opener, spilled onto the Persian rug. A massive walnut desk, its surface once pristine, bore scratches as if clawed by desperate hands. Above it hung the painting of the Last Supper, its sombre apostles gazing down with accusing eyes. The canvas was tilted, its heavy frame disturbed, and faint marks marred the wall around it. Poirot's gaze lingered on the painting, his grey cells humming. "This," he murmured, "is no ordinary vandalism." Klaus stood rigid, his pale face a mask of distress. "I found it like this, monsieur," he said, his voice tight. "I came to fetch the Baroness's shawl and saw this desecration." Poirot nodded, his eyes sweeping the room. A safe, embedded in the wall behind a sliding panel, stood open, its contents, jewel cases and documents, untouched. He crouched, examining the floor, where a single drop of wax had hardened near the desk. "Curious," he said, straightening. "The thief sought something specific, yet left treasures behind. Why?" The Baroness arrived, her footsteps swift and purposeful. She froze at the threshold, her hand flying to her sapphire pendant. "Mon Dieu," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the painting. "They knew." Poirot turned to her, his voice soft but insistent. "Madame, what is it about this painting that draws such attention? You spoke of a betrayal. Is it tied to this Last Supper?" Her lips parted, then closed as if the words were too heavy to speak. "That painting," she said at last, "is more than art. It holds a secret, one I have guarded for years." She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the frame, and Poirot noted the way her eyes searched its edges, as if expecting to find something missing. "I cannot tell you more, monsieur, not yet, but someone here knows its value." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Value, madame, is a matter of perspective. Is it wealth they seek or something else?" She met his gaze, her expression a blend of resolve and fear, but offered no answer. He turned to the painting, his magnifying glass in hand, inspecting the frame's intricate carvings. The scratches were fresh, deliberate, concentrated near the lower edge. "This was no random act," he said. "The intruder knew precisely where to look." He dismissed Klaus with a nod, instructing him to guard the door, and beckoned the Baroness to remain. "Madame, I must ask, who among your guests has shown interest in this painting?" She hesitated, then named Herr Gustav Mahler, the art dealer who had appraised it years ago, and Dr. Karl Weber, whose chemical expertise had led him to inquire about her collection's preservation. Herr Friedrich Lang, the financier, had also made an offer to purchase it, though she had declined. He was persistent, she added, her voice low, almost too much so. Poirot returned to the dining room, where the guests waited, their faces a gallery of unease. Frau Anna Richter clutched her wine-glass, her knuckles white. Herr Victor Braun leaned back, his diplomatic smile strained. Elsa Klein's pen hovered over her notebook, poised to capture any slip. Poirot stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding silence. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "the Baroness's study has been ransacked, but nothing of obvious value was taken. The painting of the Last Supper, however, was disturbed. I ask you now, where were you when this occurred?" The responses came swiftly, each guest eager to clear their name. Dr. Weber claimed he had stepped out to the lavatory, his nervous tic betraying his discomfort. Frau Richter said she was in the hallway, adjusting her shawl, though no one could confirm her presence. Herr Braun insisted he remained at the table, a claim the general corroborated, albeit vaguely. Countess Sophia Dragomir said she had been admiring a tapestry near the dining room, her voice soft but steady. Herr Lang, mopping his brow, declared he was too engrossed in the pheasant to notice anything amiss. Elsa Klein, with a journalist's boldness, admitted to wandering near the study, curious about the house's architecture. Poirot listened, his eyes darting from one face to another, noting the flicker of a glance, the tightening of a jaw. Each alibi was plausible, yet each felt like a thread in a tapestry not yet woven. He addressed the group again, his tone deceptively mild. "The painting, it seems, is the heart of this mystery. If any of you know of its significance, speak now. Silence, mes amis, can be as revealing as words." No one spoke, but Poirot saw the tension ripple through the room. Herr Mahler's fingers tightened around his fork. Dr. Weber's spectacles slipped slightly, and Frau Richter's laugh, when it came, was brittle as glass. The Baroness, standing by the door, watched them all, her face a mask of guarded anticipation. Poirot bowed slightly. "Very well. I shall continue my inquiries, but know this. The truth, like a painting, cannot remain hidden forever." As the guests dispersed to their rooms under Klaus's watchful eye, Poirot lingered in the dining room, his mind replaying the evening's events. The painting of the Last Supper, with its 12 apostles, mirrored the 12 at the table, and he could not shake the sense that one among them played the role of Judas. he resolved to examine the painting again at first light, for its secret, he was certain, held the key to the night's disturbance. With a final glance at the empty table, he retired to his room, his grey cells alight with the puzzle of Vienna. Chapter 4. The Shadow of Motive. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Baroness's drawing room, casting a golden haze over the gathered guests. Hercule Poirot stood before the marble fireplace, its hearth cold but for the faint scent of ash lingering from the previous night. The air was thick with unspoken questions, the guests' faces a mosaic of apprehension and guarded curiosity. The ransacking of the study had unsettled them all, and Poirot, with his impeccable suit and gleaming moustache, was a figure of calm authority amid their disquiet. He clasped his hands behind his back, his dark eyes sweeping the room like a painter assessing his canvas. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice soft yet piercing, "last night's intrusion was no act of chance. The study was violated with purpose, the painting of the Last Supper its target. I ask you now, what do you know of this painting, and what motive might drive such an act?" His words hung in the air, sharp as a blade, and he watched for the telltale signs of guilt, a flicker of the eyes, a tightening of the lips. Countess Sophia Dragomir spoke first, her voice low and tinged with the cadence of her Romanian homeland. "The Baroness collects art with histories," she said, her dark eyes fixed on the floor. "Some whisper that her treasures carry curses, or secrets too heavy for one soul to bear." Her words were measured, but Poirot noted the way her fingers twisted the lace of her sleeve, a gesture of unease. Herr Gustav Mahler, the art dealer, scoffed, his paint-stained hands gesturing dismissively. "Superstition, nothing more. The painting is valuable, Renaissance, rare, a masterwork. Its worth lies in its market, not in fairy tales." Yet his eyes darted to the Baroness a fleeting glance that Poirot caught, like a moth in a net. The art dealer knew more than he admitted, perhaps about the painting's provenance, or its hidden value. Poirot turned to Elsa Klein, the journalist, whose auburn hair gleamed in the sunlight. "Mademoiselle Klein, your profession thrives on uncovering truths. Have you heard whispers of this painting?" She hesitated, her sharp gaze meeting his, then admitted she was investigating rumors of a lost codex, said to be concealed within a work of art in the Baroness's collection. "A codex?" Poirot pressed, his tone deceptively mild. "Of what nature?" Elsa shrugged, her notebook clutched tightly. "I only know it's old, possibly alchemical. My sources were vague." Her casual air did not fool Poirot. Her fingers betrayed her, gripping the notebook as if it were a shield. The other guests offered little. Dr. Karl Weber, the chemist, adjusted his spectacles and muttered about the painting's age, his nervous tic more pronounced under Poirot's scrutiny. Herr Friedrich Lang, the financier, claimed ignorance, though his restless hands suggested otherwise. Frau Anna Richter, the soprano, laughed nervously, insisting she cared only for music, not art. Herr Victor Braun, the diplomat, remained silent, his diplomatic smile a mask that revealed nothing. The remaining guests, the general, the playwright, the botanist, the historian, and the heiress, offered platitudes or silence, their contributions as empty as the fireplace. Poirot paced, his steps deliberate, his mind weaving the threads of their words. "A codex," he mused aloud, "hidden within a painting. A secret worth ransacking a study for. But whose hand reached for it and why?" He paused, letting the question linger, watching the guests shift in their seats. The Baroness, seated near the window, observed in silence, her sapphire pendant glinting like a third eye. After dismissing the guests, Poirot sought out Klaus, the butler, in the servants' quarters. The gaunt man was polishing silver, his movements mechanical. "Klaus," Poirot said, his tone conversational, "you know this house and its secrets. Tell me of the Baroness's staff. Has anyone shown undue curiosity?" Klaus hesitated, then revealed that a footman, Hans, had been dismissed weeks earlier for prying into the Baroness's private papers. "He was too curious, monsieur," Klaus said, his voice low. "Always near the study, asking about her art. I heard he had ties to Herr Lang, the financier." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And where is this Hans now?" Klaus shook his head. "Gone, monsieur. Vanished the day he was sacked." The information was a spark in Poirot's mind, igniting new possibilities. A dismissed servant, a financier with debts, a painting with a secret. The threads were tightening, but the pattern remained elusive. Returning to the drawing-room, Poirot requested a private audience with the Baroness. She received him in her parlour. A smaller room adorned with porcelain figurines and a single watercolour of the Danube. "Madame," he said, seating himself with precision, "this codex Mademoiselle Klein speaks of, does it exist?" The Baroness's face tightened, her hands folding in her lap. "It is possible," she said carefully. "My collection includes items of historical significance, but I will not speak of it yet. Trust that I will reveal what is necessary when the time comes." Poirot inclined his head, respecting her reticence but noting her fear. "Very well, madame. But know this. The shadow you fear is close, and I shall find it." He rose, his mind already turning to the painting. He resolved to examine it again, to probe its secrets before the day ended. As he left the parlour, he passed Frau Richter in the hall, her face pale as she hummed a fragment of an aria, her eyes avoiding his. Suspicion, Poirot knew, was a seed that grew in silence, and this house was fertile ground. By afternoon, Poirot stood alone in the study, the painting of the Last Supper before him. Its apostles seemed to watch him, their painted eyes heavy with judgment. He traced the frame's carvings with a gloved finger, noting the scratches from the previous night. "What do you hide?" he murmured, his grey cells alight. The ransacking was a clue, but the motive remained a shadow, flitting just beyond his grasp. He knew one thing: the betrayer was among the 12, and he would not rest until their face was revealed. Chapter 5. The Second Betrayal. The evening draped Baroness von Hohenberg's mansion in a velvet hush, broken only by the clink of silverware as the guests reconvened for dinner. The dining room, still radiant with chandelier light, felt colder now, as if the ransacking of the study had leached warmth from the air. Hercule Poirot sat at his place, his eyes scanning the table with the precision of a jeweller examining a flawed gem. The guests, though dressed in their finery, wore expressions of strain. Frau Anna Richter's smile was brittle. Herr Victor Braun's diplomatic poise seemed forced, and Dr. Karl Weber's tic had grown more pronounced, his spectacles glinting nervously. The Baroness at the head of the table maintained her regal composure, but her fingers, gripping her wine-glass, betrayed a tremor. The meal proceeded uneasily, the conversation stilted. The other guests spoke of Vienna's autumn festivals and the latest opera. But their words lacked conviction. Like actors reciting lines they no longer believed. Poirot, sipping his consommé, noted the glances exchanged across the table. Elsa Klein's sharp eyes darting to Herr Gustav Mahler, Countess Sophia Dragomir's gaze lingering on the Baroness, Herr Friedrich Lang's restless fingers twisting his napkin. The painting of the Last Supper loomed in Poirot's mind, its 12 apostles a silent echo of the 12 at this table. He sensed a crescendo approaching, a moment when the hidden would be revealed. That moment came with a gunshot, sharp and jarring, shattering the fragile decorum. It echoed from the garden, a sound as cold and final as a guillotine's fall. The guests froze, their faces pale, then surged toward the French doors leading outside. Poirot, his movements calm but swift, followed, his grey cells already at work. The garden was a maze of moonlit hedges and marble statues, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and roses. At the centre, near a gurgling fountain, lay Herr Gustav Mahler, the art dealer, slumped against the stone basin. A dark stain spread across his chest, and his eyes, wide and unseeing, stared at the stars. In his clenched fist was a scrap of paper, its edges crumpled. Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved hands careful not to disturb the scene. The wound, a single bullet to the heart, suggested precision, not passion. He pried open Mahler's fingers, revealing the paper. Scrawled in hasty ink was a single word: Judas. Poirot's moustache twitched, his mind racing. The word was a clue, a deliberate message, but from whom, and to whom? He scanned the ground, noting the absence of a weapon. The killer had been meticulous, leaving no trace save the body and the note. The Baroness, arriving with Klaus, gasped at the sight, her hand flying to her sapphire pendant. "Gustav!" she whispered, her voice breaking. Poirot rose, his eyes meeting hers. "Madame, this is no random act. Herr Mahler was targeted, and the word Judas suggests a betrayal, perhaps tied to your painting." She nodded, her face ashen, but offered no further insight. The guests gathered at the garden's edge whispered among themselves, their voices a low hum of fear and suspicion. Poirot addressed them, his tone commanding attention. "Mesdames et messieurs, a murder has been committed. No one is to leave this estate. The police will be summoned, but first, I must know. Where were you when the shot was fired?" The alibis came quickly, each guest eager to distance themselves from the crime. Frau Richter, tears streaking her face, claimed she was in her room practicing arias, though her trembling hands suggested otherwise. Dr. Weber said he was in the library, studying chemical formulas, but his nervous tic betrayed his unease. Herr Braun admitted to wandering the garden alone, to clear my thoughts, a claim no one could verify. Countess Sophia said she was in the conservatory, admiring the orchids, her soft voice steady but her eyes haunted. Herr Lang, sweating profusely, insisted he was in the billiard room with the general, who nodded vaguely in agreement. Elsa Klein, ever the journalist, admitted to being near the garden, exploring the grounds, her notebook clutched tightly. Poirot listened, his mind cataloguing inconsistencies. Braun's solitary walk was too convenient, Richter's tears too theatrical, Weber's tic too pronounced. He instructed Klaus to fetch the police, then returned to Mahler's body, examining it closely. The art dealer's coat was rumpled, his paint-stained fingers stiff in death. Poirot noted a faint smudge of blue on the fountain's edge, matching the stains on Mahler's hands. Had he been painting before his death, or was this a clue to something else? Back in the dining room, Poirot gathered the guests, his presence a calming force amid their panic. "The word Judas," he said, holding up the scrap of paper, "is a message. Herr Mahler was either the betrayer or the betrayed. His knowledge of the Baroness's painting, perhaps its secret, made him a target." He paused, watching their faces. I urge you to speak now if you know anything of this Judas." Silence answered, but Poirot saw the flickers of fear. Lang's sweating brow, Klein's tightened grip, Braun's clenched jaw. The Baroness, standing by the fireplace, spoke softly. "Gustave knew my collection well. He was curious about the Last Supper." Her words were careful, but Poirot sensed she withheld more. As the police arrived, their boots echoing in the hall, Poirot resolved to uncover the painting's secret. The word Judas echoed the Baroness's fear of betrayal, and he suspected the killer was among the 11 remaining guests. He would need to probe deeper, to unravel the motives hidden behind their polished facades. The night was far from over, and Hercule Poirot's grey cells were only beginning their work. Chapter 6. The Codex revealed. The morning after Herr Mahler's murder, the Baroness's mansion seemed to hold its breath, the opulent halls shrouded in a pall of suspicion. Hercule Poirot stood in the study, the painting of the Last Supper looming before him like a silent witness. Its apostles, rendered in sombre hues, appeared to judge the chaos that had unfolded beneath them. The police had come and gone, cordoning off the garden and questioning the guests. But Poirot had insisted on examining the study again, certain that the painting held the key to both the ransacking and the murder. The air was heavy with the scent of old books and wax, and a faint draught stirred the curtains as if the room itself whispered secrets. Poirot's gloved hands moved with precision, his magnifying glass catching the morning light as he inspected the painting's frame. The scratches from the ransacking were deliberate, concentrated along the lower edge, suggesting an attempt to pry it open. He stepped back, his dark eyes narrowing. "There is something here," he murmured, "something hidden in plain sight." With the Baroness's permission, he gently lifted the canvas from its hooks, revealing a faint seam in the wooden backing. His fingers, deft as a surgeon's, traced the seam until he found a concealed latch. A soft click echoed, and a small panel slid open, exposing a leather-bound codex, its pages yellowed with age. The Baroness, standing nearby, gasped, her hand clutching her sapphire pendant. "It is as I feared," she whispered, "the codex!" Poirot lifted the fragile manuscript, its cover embossed with faded alchemical symbols. "Madame," he said, his voice calm but insistent, "what is this document, and why does it inspire such desperation?" Her eyes, sharp yet haunted, met his. "It is a 15th-century manuscript, monsieur, detailing alchemical processes, secrets of transmutation and elixirs. Its value is beyond gold, but in the wrong hands, it could be dangerous." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Dangerous how, madame? To whom?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the door. "The knowledge it contains could shift power, scientific, political, even military. I have guarded it to prevent its misuse." Her voice trembled, betraying the weight of her secret. Poirot nodded, his grey cells alight. The codex was the motive, the thread tying the ransacking to Mahler's murder. But who among the guests sought it, and why? He replaced the codex in its hiding place, securing the panel, and turned to the Baroness. "Who knew of this manuscript?" She admitted that Herr Mahler, as her art advisor, had suspected its existence, having studied the painting's history. Dr. Karl Weber, with his chemical expertise, had asked probing questions about her collection, hinting at an interest in alchemical texts. Herr Friedrich Lang, the financier, had once offered a fortune for the painting, unaware of its hidden treasure, but eager for profit. "And Herr Braun?" Poirot asked, recalling the diplomat's guarded demeanour. The Baroness shook her head. "He never spoke of it, but his work in diplomatic circles, He hears things. Poirot summoned Dr. Weber to the study, the chemist's nervous tic more pronounced under scrutiny. "Monsieur," Poirot began, his tone deceptively mild, "you are a man of science. Tell me, what interest have you in the Baroness's art?" Weber's spectacles slipped, and he pushed them up with a trembling hand. "I am a chemist, Monsieur Poirot, not an art thief. I study preservation techniques, nothing more." Yet his knowledge of alchemical texts, revealed in a slip about medieval manuscripts, was too precise for mere curiosity. Poirot dismissed him, noting the sweat on his brow. Next, he questioned Herr Lang in the drawing-room. The financier's jovial facade crumbled under Poirot's gaze. "Yes, I offered to buy the painting," Lang admitted, his rings glinting as he gestured. "I saw its market value, nothing sinister." But when pressed about his financial troubles, he grew evasive, his eyes darting to the window. "Murder? Never! I am a businessman, not a killer." Poirot smiled thinly, filing away Lang's desperation. As evening approached, Poirot gathered the guests in the dining room, the chandelier casting long shadows across their tense faces. "Mes amis," he said, pacing before the table, "the painting of the Last Supper hides a codex, a manuscript of great power. Herr Mahler's death was no accident. He knew too much. The killer seeks this codex, but for what? Wealth, power, or something darker?" He paused, watching their reactions. Frau Anna Richter's laugh was absent, her face pale. Herr Victor Braun's smile was a mask. Elsa Klein's pen hovered, poised for revelation. Countess Sophia Dragomir's eyes were fixed on her hands, as if hiding a secret of her own. "The word Judas, found on Herr Mahler," Poirot continued, "suggests a betrayal. But who is the betrayer? I urge you to speak, for silence protects the guilty." No one answered, but the air crackled with fear. Poirot's gaze lingered on Braun, whose solitary walk in the garden placed him near Mahler's death. He noted Klein's notebook, filled with cryptic shorthand, and Weber's tic, now almost constant. The codex was the prize, but the motive was personal, a wound deeper than greed. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered, his mind weaving the clues. The codex's alchemical secrets could tempt a scientist like Weber, a financier like Lang, or a diplomat like Braun, each with their own ambitions. The painting's apostles, with their silent judgment, seemed to mock his progress, but Poirot was undeterred. He would recreate the dinner, he decided, to draw the killer into the open. The truth was close, and Hercule Poirot would not let it slip through his fingers. Chapter 7. The Final Supper. The dining room of Baroness von Hohenberg's mansion glowed with the same opulent splendor as the first night, its chandeliers casting a golden sheen over the mahogany table. Yet the air was thick with dread, as if the walls themselves sensed the climax of the drama unfolding. Hercule Poirot had orchestrated this evening with meticulous care, insisting that every detail mirror the original dinner. The same seating, the same menu, the same candelabrum flickering at the center. The 11 remaining guests, their faces etched with strain, took their places, each aware that a murderer sat among them. The empty chair where Herr Gustav Mahler had sat was a silent accusation, and the painting of the Last Supper, now back in the study, seemed to loom over them in spirit. Poirot stood at the head of the table, his small frame radiating authority, his dark eyes sharp as they scanned the guests. The Baroness at her place wore a mask of composure, but her sapphire pendant glinted with every nervous breath. Frau Anna Richter's hands trembled as she lifted her wine glass. Dr. Karl Weber's tick had become a constant flutter. Herr Victor Braun's diplomatic smile was a brittle veneer. Herr Friedrich Lang's rings caught the light as he fidgeted. Elsa Klein's notebook lay closed, her gaze darting like a hawk's. Countess Sophia Dragomir sat still, her melancholy eyes unreadable. The general, the playwright, the botanist, the historian, and the heiress filled the remaining seats, their silence heavy with anticipation. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Tonight, we recreate the Last Supper, not for dining, but for truth. A codex hidden within the painting has driven one of you to ransack a study and commit murder. Herr Mahler paid with his life, and the word Judas was left as a taunt. But the truth, mes amis, cannot hide from Hercule Poirot." He paced, his hands clasped behind his back, his words deliberate. "Let us consider the facts. The study was ransacked to find the codex, a manuscript of alchemical secrets. Herr Mahler, with his knowledge of art, suspected its existence. His death was no accident. He was silenced, but by whom? And why?" He paused, letting the question hang, watching the guests' faces for the crack that would betray the guilty. Poirot turned to Dr. Weber, whose spectacles gleamed nervously. "Monsieur Weber, your expertise in chemistry suggests an interest in the Codex's alchemical secrets. Your alibi for the ransacking is weak, and your tic betrays your unease." Weber sputtered, "I am a scientist, not a murderer." But his hands shook, spilling wine onto the tablecloth. Next, Poirot faced Herr Lang. "Monsieur Lang, your financial troubles are no secret. You sought the painting for profit, perhaps knowing of the codex. Your connection to the dismissed footman, Hans, raises questions." Lang's face reddened. "I am no killer. My debts are my own affair." Yet his eyes darted to the door, as if seeking escape. Poirot's gaze settled on Herr Braun, the diplomat whose calm facade faltered. "Monsieur Braun, you were in the garden when Herr Mahler was shot. You claim you were alone, yet Klaus saw you speaking with Mahler moments before his death. Your diplomatic work gives you access to secrets. Perhaps you sought the codex for a foreign power." Braun rose, his voice sharp. "This is outrageous. I am a servant of my country, not a criminal." The room crackled with tension, the guests' eyes flitting between Poirot and Braun. Then Poirot raised a hand, his voice softening but no less commanding. "The painting of the Last Supper is the key. Its 12 apostles mirror the 12 at this table, and one of you is Judas. The Codex's power, scientific, political, tempted you, but the motive is deeper, a betrayal born of ambition." He paused, his eyes locking onto Braun. "Monsieur Braun, it is you." Braun laughed, a harsh, desperate sound, and bolted for the door. Klaus and 2 footmen, stationed at Poirot's instruction, seized him before he could escape. The guests gasped, their voices rising in a clamour. Poirot continued, undeterred. "You ransacked the study, Monsieur Braun, seeking the codex. When Herr Mahler, who knew of your interest, confronted you in the garden, you shot him, leaving the note Judas to cast suspicion on him. But your alibi was flawed, and Klaus's testimony places you at the scene." Braun struggled, his face pale. "You have no proof." Poirot smiled thinly. "The smudge of blue paint on the fountain, matching Mahler's hands, was also on your cuff, monsieur, noticed when you reached for your glass tonight. You argued with Mahler, and in the struggle, his paint-stained hand marked you. The police will find the pistol, I am certain, hidden in the garden where you left it." The Baroness rose, her voice trembling with gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot, you have saved us." Poirot bowed, his calm unshaken. "It is the method of Hercule Poirot, madame, to see what others overlook. The truth is always there, waiting to be uncovered. As the police, summoned earlier, took Braun into custody, the guests dispersed, their relief mingled with shock. Poirot remained, his mind already turning to the codex, now safe in the Baroness's hands. The painting's secret was secure, but the human heart with its capacity for betrayal remained the greatest puzzle of all. Chapter 8. The Departure. The morning sun bathed Vienna in a soft amber glow, its light filtering through the tall windows of Baroness von Hohenberg's mansion. The air, once heavy with suspicion, now carried a fragile calm, as if the house itself exhaled in relief. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand foyer, his valise packed, his impeccable suit pristine despite the tumult of the past days. His moustache, waxed to perfection, gleamed as he adjusted his hat, preparing to depart. The events of the final supper lingered in his mind, a puzzle solved, but not without cost. Herr Victor Braun, the diplomat unmasked as the murderer, was now in police custody. His motives laid bare. A desperate bid for the Codex's alchemical secrets, driven by foreign interests and personal ambition. The painting of the Last Supper, its hidden compartment secure, remained in the study, a silent guardian of the Baroness's trust. The Baroness herself descended the marble staircase, her emerald gown replaced by a sombre black dress, her silver hair still elegant in its chignon. Her face, though pale, bore the strength of one who had faced betrayal, and emerged unbroken. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice warm with gratitude, "you have restored order to my house. I am forever in your debt." She extended a small package wrapped in velvet. "A token, if you will accept it." Poirot unwrapped it with care, revealing a delicate sketch by the same Renaissance artist who painted the Last Supper, a study of an apostle, its lines both austere and profound. "Madam," he said, bowing, "it is a treasure, but the true reward is the clarity of truth." He tucked the sketch into his valise, noting the Baroness's faint smile, a rare crack in her composed facade. The remaining guests, subdued and eager to leave, gathered in the drawing-room to bid farewell. Frau Anna Richter, her soprano's vibrancy dimmed, offered a tentative nod, her eyes no longer darting. Dr. Karl Weber, his tic subdued, muttered a stiff thank you, his relief palpable. Herr Friedrich Lang, his financial woes still evident in his furrowed brow, avoided Poirot's gaze, perhaps ashamed of his own secrets. Elsa Klein, the journalist, approached with her notebook in hand. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice sharp but respectful, "you've given me a story, though I suspect you'd prefer it unwritten." Poirot smiled thinly. "Mademoiselle, write what you must, but remember, discretion is the better part of valor." Countess Sophia Dragomir lingered at the edge of the room, her melancholy softened by a quiet gratitude. "You have a gift, monsieur," she said softly. "You see the heart's shadows." Poirot inclined his head, touched by her words but ever guarded. The general, the playwright, the botanist, the historian, and the heiress offered their own farewells, each marked by a mix of awe and unease at the little Belgian who had unravelled their tangled web. Klaus, the butler, escorted Poirot to the waiting car, his gaunt face less severe now. "You have done a great service, monsieur," he said, his German accent clipped but sincere. Poirot nodded, his mind briefly revisiting Klaus's testimony, which had sealed Braun's fate. The butler's vigilance had been crucial, a reminder that truth often hid in the quiet observations of those who served. As the car wound through Vienna's cobblestone streets toward the Westbahnhof, Poirot gazed out at the city's baroque facades. its spires piercing the morning mist. The Alps loomed in the distance, their peaks a testament to permanence amid human folly. He thought of the codex now locked in the Baroness's safe, its secrets preserved. The painting of the Last Supper, with its 12 apostles, had mirrored the 12 at the table, and Braun, the Judas, had played his part to the end. Yet Poirot knew the human heart was a labyrinth, its motives never fully plumbed. At the station, he boarded the Orient Express, settling into his first-class compartment with the sketch beside him. As the train hummed to life, carrying him back to London, he opened the sketch, studying its line, "The heart," he mused aloud, "is the greatest mystery of all. It betrays, it loves, it hides. And yet, with method, it can be understood." He closed the sketchbook, his grey cells at rest, ready for the next puzzle that awaited in the world beyond Vienna.